Hello and welcome to another exciting episode of the Cheap Dragon Show. I'm Frugalmax, the Cheap Dragon. Yep. Back in the early 90s, Heartbreaker Miniatures made some metal figures that could be used for various fantasy games like D&D and Warhammer and such. These miniatures can still sometimes be found on sites like eBay, and since they weren't quite as popular as the Warhammer guys, they don't often go for the nauseatingly expensive prices. But you're still looking at paying a pretty steep price for a 30-year-old lump of tin. Anyway, a few years ago, the small independent company called Impact Miniatures got a hold of some of the original Heartbreaker miniatures and the rights to produce them, and are doing so using their own special spin-cast resin technology. Okay, so on today's episode, we're looking at cheap retro spin-cast resin miniatures. Woof. What the heck does that mean? Let's try again! On today's episode, Heartbreaker Miniatures by Impact Miniatures from the 90s in the 2020s. Ugh. What else have we got? Resurrected miniatures, not all undead. Everything old is new again. Very original. Try again. Do you need an excuse to buy more toys? Okay, that might hit a little bit too close to the mark for some. We're going with whatever comes next. On today's episode, the Cheap Elf Review. That sounds better, I guess. But why elves? Why not something with a bit more, menace or bite? Oh well. Let's see how these old miniatures do.
Okay, here's the Impact Miniatures Elves. These are resin recasts of the old Heartbreaker miniatures from the early to mid 90s. 24 elves, standard rare and a musician, a bunch of guys with swords. Most of them have shields. There's a couple without shields. You have 4 of these guys with funny hats. Dragon hats. Yeah, 3 spearmen, 3 archers, 1 sort of female adventurer type bandit thief, 3 wizardly looking persons, and this guy who looks sort of like a big wicked boss type. They seem to be really nicely detailed casts. A little bit of bend on the very small stuff, but I imagine that could be maybe corrected with some warm water.
Let's see if he can fix the bent models.
Got my mug of really hot water, and I'm just gonna dip that in there. The thinner the piece, the smaller the piece, the less time it needs to soften. So for staffs and spears and swords, it should be pretty quick to get hot and softer, and hopefully you can straighten it out and let it re-harden or re-cure. Hopefully it doesn't just dissolve entirely. Oh yeah, that definitely gets soft. And then the question is, can you get it to re-cure in a straight position?
I guess we'll take your word for it because it's completely off
Straighter.
camera.
The one that's the thinnest is this guy's sword here. And where's the best view for that?
There you go, yes. If you hold it behind the mug and let the viewer use their imagination, it really gets the point across. Failure!
The sword is really thin, but it's also not straight, so we're just gonna try and put it in for a little bit. And wow, that seemed to do it all on its own. So the hot water trick is seeming to work with these spin-cast resin minis. Pretty successful. So here we have the same miniature. This one was cast in pewter back in the 90s, and it's got a date on there. Is it legible? Hard to say. And then this one was recently cast by Impact Miniatures Looks like 97, maybe 92.
Perhaps he can't tell because it is out of focus, but it clearly says 1992. Maybe he's distracted by the glamorous lighting, or more likely he failed to learn how to read numbers.
There's definitely some flash and maybe a little bit of mold line stuff, but nothing that would be too difficult to trim away. And that same sort of stuff is around the mold lines of the metal miniature.
Again, something one could tell if you kept the miniature in focus.
Yeah, I think the detail level on the resin miniature might be a little bit better than the original metal casting, which is kind of neat to see. So I'm gonna see how some of these guys paint up.
Spray paint time!
So here we have the result of the spray paint test, and
again, blocking the camera with the hand. Can we fire this guy, please?
the material is not sticky nor tacky, so we can go ahead and spray prime all of the other little guys.
Okay, let's see how they look painted up.
Okay, so here we have the first batch, and we've got 3 archers that haven't been changed. A little warrior guy who has a sword conversion, just a sword swap. The wizard had a sort of metal ring around his hand that got cut off, and I swapped his arm for a sword. And this is that spearman. He just got a shield stuck on. That shield is from, I think, the Oathmark plastics.
They're not terribly painted, but not going to win any prizes, that's for sure. This is not really a how-to paint show, more of a take a look at these and do better for yourself, why don't you?
The other interesting thing about these miniatures is they have these kind of like either massive eyebrows or bangs, but there's definitely some detail sculpted on there in the eyebrow area, and it's just an interesting choice. Another interesting choice is the shields. That shield's not going to protect you for much. But overall, I like these miniatures. They're well done. It's nice to get your hands on some old guys.
What does it mean it's nice to get your hands on old guys?
They're easy to cut up and convert. They're relatively inexpensive.
How much do they cost? Well, 24 miniatures for $35, that's not bad. That's less than $1.50 a miniature. That's comparable to some of the injected plastic miniatures that come on sprue. How else do they compare with other miniatures?
Here's a comparison to an elf from Citadel from maybe the late 80s or early 90s, so roughly the same period. But the Citadel miniature clearly has a bit more detail. I think they were kind of a bit more premium, even back in those days, than the Heartbreaker guys. But they scale together pretty well. This one is more from the late 90s, maybe even early 2000s. This is the late 80s, early 90s, and then I don't know, maybe late 80s or early 90s, somewhere in there. Let's compare some other similar ones. This one is a Reaper Miniatures elf with some minor conversions on the arms, but you can see the Reaper one is a little bit bigger, a little bit bulkier, but I think they still work together pretty well. Here's our Heartbreaker Wizard with the minor arm swap and a little bit of trimming of the original sculpt. Let's compare them to, here's a Reaper Miniatures elf. Here's a Dunkeldorf Miniatures elf. You can see that they're both bigger. The Reaper and the Dunkeldorf are much more modern. But overall, I think they mix together pretty well.
It should be noted that in addition to these old Heartbreaker elves, they also have some classic-looking orcs, goblins, and other fantasy creatures from Heartbreaker over at the Impact Miniatures website. Though they might want to look at making their website easier to find things on. You kind of have to search for what you think is there and see what they got. Anyway, until next time, if there is a next time. I'm Frugalmax. Don't spend too much. Bye. Okay, one more. On today's episode, Heartbreaker Miniatures return with impact. Wait, that one actually works. Stick it on a thumbnail. We're done.